So, I wanted to make a video about why dismissive avoidant attachment styles often tend to end up in situationships. If you are not already familiar, the dismissive avoidant attachment style is the person in a romantic relationship who tends to be more afraid of commitment. They tend to be a little bit more shut down, cold, slower to warm up. And this often stems from the fact that they went through some form of neglect in childhood where they didn't really have their emotional needs met. Thus, the concept or idea of emotional connection is not something that's only not modeled to them growing up, and so becomes an unknown in their lives for how to properly do that or deeply do that, but also becomes something that they associate as being rejected in childhood because we are innately wired to emotionally connect with our caregivers. In other words, when a dismissive avoidant is a child, they're yearning for emotional connection from their parents and it's not there in the way that they need it. They tend to reject that part of themselves as a means of safely attaching to others. And this becomes their programming or the set of patterns they bring into their adult romantic relationships. Hence, why it can be difficult for dismissive avoidance to truly open up and emotionally attach to the other people around them. So, when it comes to situationships, we're going to talk in this video about why dismissive avoidants often end up in those situationships and why you might be experiencing, if you're on the receiving end of this, a lot of like confusing patterns of behavior, mixed signals from the dismissive avoidant, and not really know where you stand. So, a common theme that you'll see for dismissive avoidance is that they end up in situationships with people where it's like they want to act to a certain degree like they're in a relationship without actually getting into the relationship, without actually committing to it and fully like putting both feet in. And one of the biggest first reasons that we often talk about on this channel as to why that takes place is because dismissive avoidants are operating from their feelings minus their fears. Now, in the early stages of dating, the dating stage of relationships where we're vetting each other and kind of learning about each other, in that stage, dismissive avoidants don't really have many fears. There's nothing really to fear yet because they don't have to be vulnerable. They don't have to open up too much. There's not a lot of emotional connection happening that much that early that's going to cause some of those subconsciously stored fears and triggers to start firing. In other words, in that dating stage, dismissive avoidants have their needs met for connection without having their fears pressed on or their triggers or wounds from past attachments with their parents being pushed on. And so it's almost like they're in their feelings with their fears really being dormant. And so it feels like an easy stage of relationships for them. Now, what starts happening, and this is a big reason that you'll constantly hear dismissive avoidance be in dynamics where they're like, oh, I really liked this person for the first few months. And then I don't really know what happened. I just started feeling like I wasn't sure if it was going to work. I wasn't sure if this was the right person. Everything was great. And then it's like something just changed out of the blue. Part of what's happening subconsciously, meaning dismissive avoidants are not often consciously aware of this. But as somebody who ran a client-based practice and worked with a ton of DAs, over the better part of the last 10 years or so, 12 years or so, um, I had a lot of these discussions with people and, would bring up these fears and sort of talk to them about it. And then they would become consciously aware of what was there. And a lot of dismissive avoidance would say, yeah, I guess when I look at it, as things got closer and as more commitment or vulnerability was required, I guess that's my pattern. I guess that is when I do kind of shut down and pull away. And if I'm thinking about it and reflecting on it, often it's because I start feeling like, what if I'm not capable of meeting this person's needs? Or what if I'm caught in the wrong relationship and, I miss out on something that would be better suited to me? Or what if I, have to really open myself up and then it doesn't work anyways? And then I'm just feeling really hurt and rejected. Do I even want to expose myself to that when I'm doing a good job of being on my own? And so a lot of dismissive avoidants have these subconsciously embedded fears that are there, and they tend to revolve around these crucial sort of areas: fear of being vulnerable, fear of being emotionally rejected, fear of being criticized and feeling like they're not good enough or they're incapable or something's wrong with them that they can't meet their partner's needs, fear of conflict and not really knowing how to work through conflict, which is literally an inevitable part of having a securely attached relationship, and fearing that things won't work out at some point in time and then there will just be hurt that happens. So they have all these fears. And again, these tend to mirror the fact that in early attachment relationships, a lot of their needs just weren't met. And so they tend to assume the worst case scenario outcomes in their adult romantic relationships. Because if you didn't already know, we subconsciously, all of us, no matter what your attachment style is, replace our caregiver relationships with our parents through our adult romantic relationships in our adult lives. And we tend to sort of subconsciously relate to them through a similar lens that we're looking through. And we tend to have similar expectations and similar needs that we try to get met and similar patterns of communication and everything, really. So, what you see is GAs are in the feelings minus their fears. Their fears come up. And then the next thing that starts to really happen is that they end up flaw finding. So, they end up really looking into like what could go wrong and all the things that could happen that wouldn't work out the way they wanted them to. And the reason they do this is at a subconscious level, it is a survival or protective mechanism that they're using. So it's like a subconscious strategy to protect themselves. It's like if they can find the flaws and they can diminish their attachment, like one thing we know about DAs is they try to minimize their attachment needs with other styles or with other people in general as a way of self-protecting. Protecting from what? Protecting from having to re-endure what they experienced in childhood when they longed for connection and there was consistent rejection of a form of connection that they needed. So they learned, okay, it just gives me relief if I can shut that part of myself down and not even need that at all. And so what they're essentially trying to do when they end up in all these situationships time after time, by the way, before I forget, if you want to go through a whole course that talks about situationships, dating, how to actually move a situationship out of that space and into commitment, we have a course you can check out for free for 7 days called How to Master the Dating Stage of Relationships. And it helps you have really clear, conscious conversations to know your standards, your non-negotiables, but also to move a relationship to see progress and also to determine if this is the right relationship that you want to be progressing. So it just helps you get really clear and also feel confident and empowered in the dating stage. So anyways, you can check that out down below for 7 days for free if you'd like by clicking the link. So dismissive avoidance as well, they sort of like in situationships try to connect, right? And they're like wanting to connect so they can be in their feelings, get their connection needs met because we all have them, without exposing the emotional side of themselves and feeling weak or too afraid of vulnerability or any of those other core fears that we just discussed. And they're constantly operating from this feelings minus fears place. So once they start getting close and close, and these fears start coming up, they start flaw finding as a subconscious strategy to distance themselves and protect themselves from actually getting hurt. And then what ends up happening is they don't know how to work through those things and communicate about those things, like communicate about their fears and work through them with that person, or communicate about their needs if they're not being met and communicate about them with that person so that the needle moves, the relationship strengthens, they can experience, feeling deeply emotionally connected and understood by one another. And because there's also a big lack of modeling for these sorts of patterns, like there's not very much modeling DAs have in their upbringing of like how to communicate through things. Again, it's just like another barrier to them being able to move into commitment. Because like, why would you want to commit to something if first of all, you've got all these fears about it? Second of all, the way you protect yourself is to keep that thing at arm's length because you don't know how it's going to work. You don't know how to work through conflict in that situation to begin with. And then you start focusing on all the flaws as a means of keeping yourself safe. So you see these sort of big barriers that happen, and these are not conscious. These are not things that dismissive avoidance are like consciously choosing or waking up out of bed in the morning and thinking, today I'm going to consider all my partner's flaws and then ruminate about them all day long so that I can keep that person at bay, so that I don't have to feel unsafe. These are not conscious choices. They don't think about these things consciously. These are just subconscious mechanisms that are in there at a deeper level because this is how the DA has learned to adapt to their conditioning and to their environment in order to try to create a sense of safety for themselves. So by moving through these things, by understanding these things, by reprogramming their fears through a lot of different videos we talk about in this channel, and obviously a ton of tools that we have that are really fast to learn inside PDS, reprogramming fears, learning to communicate and work through conflict, learning to express needs, then that's actually how we heal and can improve the relationship and become more secure. So I hope this makes a lot of sense. It's a really important topic for ways that dismissive avoidance often sort of block themselves from ending up committing or end up staying in situationships. So thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying this channel, please let me know any comments you have down below, questions, please subscribe, and I will see you in future videos.